Hey everyone, my name is Brady Whitten, and I welcome you to this week's Mid-City Sermon Cast. So I'm excited this week. I'm starting a new sermon series, and the question for the series is, does Jesus still matter? And one of the reasons I thought this would be an important question to explore is it seems like fewer and fewer people are attending church or are part of a community of faith. And part of that is that a lot of people, I think, are sort of wondering, does this stuff still make a difference? So that's what we're going to explore over the next several weeks. So let's dive in. So a recent ABC News article highlighted something that a lot of people know already, and that is the dwindling number of people who go to church or who really are involved in any kind of religious community at all. And I got to be honest and say, I get it, right? There's much to criticize about the church, and there's much to criticize about organized religion. But I also know that people are still looking for meaning and they're looking for hope and purpose in life. And I guess that what we have to admit is that the church is doing a poor job of helping people to connect with the life-changing message of Jesus and why he matters. And so that's why I'm beginning a new series this week called Does Jesus Still Matter? And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at the life and the message of Jesus and see how it does meet the deepest needs of our heart and our world. But today we're going to begin sort of at a beginning of the Jesus story, and that is with Jesus's baptism. And I'm going to read from the Gospel of Matthew, and this is the 3rd chapter, beginning with the 13th verse. So then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, "I need you to baptize me. Why do you come to me?" But Jesus answered him, "Let it be so now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness." Then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." So, interesting thing about the gospel stories, the gospels give us information about Jesus' birth and the angels and the shepherds and the wise men and all that. But then we really don't find out anything else about Jesus until he's about age 30, and he appears in the wilderness with his cousin, John, and he is baptized. And the baptism marks the very beginning of Jesus' public ministry. So this is the part where everything else we know about the Jesus story kind of unfolds from this place. But can you imagine the scene? So Jesus goes out to the wilderness to meet John. He wades out into the Jordan River. There's a crowd gathered around. It's hard to tell whether they were paying attention or not. But John hesitates over this idea of baptizing Jesus, but then Jesus insists. And then this happens. Jesus goes under the waters, he's baptized, and when he comes up, we're told that there's a voice from the heavens. And a lot of times, if we know this story, we go, oh yeah, a voice from the heavens. But I really want you to think about that, a voice from the heavens. And the voice declares, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And there are all kinds of things that we can dive into about this story, but I really want us to kind of focus in on this voice from heaven. So a lot of times when we're reading the scriptures, we just take for granted that there's this God character that kind of moves around in this story. But this is a pretty profound moment. It's actually known as a theophany, and it's a God appearing. And I think that we learn some pretty profound things from this moment. The first thing that we learn is this: there is a God. There is a divine being, this voice that comes from heaven, and that this being is involved in human affairs. This voice is speaking into this moment. So, along with dwindling church attendance, I know that there are an increasing number of people who believe that there's no God. And instead of believing and kind of having a faith perspective on life, on the universe, they're choosing a kind of more materialistic or scientific view. And the idea is that the universe is really kind of a cosmic accident, right? It all just kind of came together randomly. It's a random coming together of atoms and energy. Now listen, I want to make it really clear that I am in no way, shape, or form anti-science. Part of my story is I had open heart surgery about seven years ago. If it was not for science, I would not be alive. So I'm a fan of science, right? And science has given us incredible tools to understand how the universe works, from galaxies to ecosystems in our bodies. But science is not equipped to answer the deeper questions of life. Why are we here? Does life have meaning? Like, what am I supposed to be doing, right? And it's not a flaw of science. It's just not the purpose of science. It'd be like using a wrench to try to fix a broken heart, right? They're different things. But I want you to think about this idea that life is sort of just a random occurrence, that the atoms and molecules in the universe came together kind of randomly, and what we end up with is people like me and you, right? If that's true, then the reality is that nothing ultimately matters. If there's no God, there's no ultimate meaning in life. Life comes down to like taking what you can while you can, right? Like I'm gonna get mine. If there's no God, if there's no higher purpose, I'm just gonna get what I can get. There's no higher purpose, no higher values. Now I know some people will say to me, but Brady, we don't need a God in order to be good and kind, do we? And I guess I would sort of answer, okay, so if there is no God, if there is no higher power, if there is no higher meaning or purpose in the universe, then whose definition of good are we using? Because my definition of good might not be the same as your definition of good. I have a pretty high opinion of people, but I also know that I'm really good at rationalizing stuff sometimes. And if I'm just left to kind of like make up my own rules in my own way in the world, I don't know how that would work out. But with God, life has meaning. Life has direction, and we have a standard that is beyond ourselves. And I don't think of that standard as a cage that restricts us, right? I think a lot of people think of, oh, well, if there's a God, there's all these rules I've got to follow. To me, that's not what this is about. It's more like that there's a compass to guide us. There's a horizon, and I know which way I'm supposed to be going and which way I'm supposed to be moving. To me, the idea of God offers us something really radical, and that is hope. That the universe is not an accident. It is created, it is intentional, and it is filled with purpose. At the heart of reality is not chaos, but love. A divine person who knows us, who loves us, and one of the primary messages in Scripture, and a God who wants to be in relationship with us. So I just think it's one of the first things that this story kind of claims, and we're faced with because of it, that there is a God. The second truth that's revealed in this story to me comes when God says this is my son. Right? So the Christian faith recognizes an intimate and familial relationship between Jesus and God. Like Jesus and God are like connected intimately. And at its heart is the claim that in Jesus, this God who is the creator of the universe has actually taken on flesh and has lived a human life. Eugene Peterson, in his translation of the Bible, says that in Jesus, God moved into the neighborhood. I kind of like that idea. So believing in God is one thing. A lot of people believe in a higher power. But the idea of God becoming human might seem a little far-fetched, like maybe something from a sci-fi movie or something, right? But here's the way to think about this. If there is a God, if there is this higher power, if there's this creator, how do we know what this God is like? Is God just an energy like electricity or like the Force in Star Wars? What does God want for us? What does God want us to do? Like, what's the purpose of all of it? With Jesus, all of these questions are answered. So if it's true that Jesus is God in the flesh, then through Jesus we can really see what God is like. We see in his compassion for the hurting that God is compassionate. One of my favorite things about Jesus is he challenges like kind of uppity, self-righteous religious people. He kind of says to them, hey, you've missed the point here. We see God's love in Jesus's love for people. In Jesus, we see the very heart of God. As the Jesus story unfolds, and we're going to dive into it more in the coming weeks, we see that Jesus doesn't take power for himself, but serves. Jesus doesn't use violence against people, but he forgives them and heals them. Ultimately, Jesus gives himself in an act of self-giving love. And, those are just some of the things we can learn about God from Jesus. And I want to say to you that if there's a God, I want that God to be like Jesus. And for me, that is a God worth worshiping. So if Jesus is God in the flesh, it also means that God knows what it's like to be human. God knows what it's like to be tired, to be hungry, to be joyful, to be heartbroken. Through Jesus, we're reminded that God knows what it's like to live our lives, knows what it's like to face grief and fear and doubt. God has walked that road too. So one of my favorite writers is Dallas Willard, and he puts this beautifully. He says, Jesus's enduring relevance is based on his ability to speak, to heal, and to empower the individual human condition. Jesus matters because he brings wholeness to ordinary lives. In sharing our weakness, he gives us strength and imparts through his companionship a life that has the quality of eternity. So I want to pause here. We kind of talked about Jesus a little bit, talked about God a little bit. I think a lot of people have been given this idea of God, that God's kind of this mean guy in the sky who's kind of out to get us. I always picture that God's like watching over us, waiting for us to mess up so that he can fry us for all of eternity, right? Just a lot of people have this idea. Let me say this to you. As a Christian, I do believe that Jesus is God, and I also believe that Jesus refutes all of those notions. Jesus tells us that he came that we might have abundant life. Like, that's why he came. Now, what about the hard stuff that Jesus says? Because he does say some hard stuff. About 80% of the hard stuff that Jesus says is directed at what people all call the religiously self-righteous. It's people who have taken the idea of God and the reality of God and the teachings of God and have actually used them as a weapon against others. Like, that's one of Jesus's primary targets. The rest of the hard stuff that Jesus says is for those whose hearts have grown cold towards the poor and the marginalized and people that are hurting in the world. And by the way, I sometimes have to include myself in those categories, right? Like I got to watch those things myself. But most of those are the hard things that Jesus says. And I got to tell you that I'm okay with Jesus challenging us on those things. Like I said, I need to be challenged on those things sometimes. How about you? So I want to take just a moment and share with you why Jesus matters to me. So when I was a young person, really kind of starting like before high school and all the way through my early 20s, I was really hurting. A lot of stuff had happened in my life that kind of just, made me angry, hurt me. But in response to that hurt, in response to my anger, I became pretty self-destructive, and I wasn't real great to other people either, especially some of the people closest to me. But as I searched for meaning in my life, I looked at all kinds of different religions. I was a philosophy and religion major when I was in college. Like, I was kind of interested in everything, and I really was seeking meaning and seeking in purpose. And I do want to say that I found a lot of meaning and interesting and beautiful things in studying world religions, but it was ultimately Jesus who gave me sort of the healing that I was looking for, reconnected me with my Heavenly Father. Jesus gave me meaning, gave me purpose. And so Jesus is incredibly meaningful to me and matters deeply in my life. So I got to say that I'm not perfect. You can talk to my wife, talk to my kids. But the way I like to say it is this: Jesus has saved me. He saved me from a lot of my anger and a lot of my self-destructiveness. Jesus is saving me, teaching me how I should live my life, how to live with others. And I also believe that Jesus will save me, whatever the future may hold. So Stephen Hawking, who is probably one of the greatest physicists, at least of our times, once said this. He said, "To believe in God and to not believe in God are both equally acts of faith." So I always like to say to people, I can't prove to you that there's a God, but nobody can prove to me that there is not. And so for me, what the question has come down to is this: is the universe impersonal and meaningless, just as kind of random accident? Or is the universe imbued with divine being and love? Those are the questions. And I got to tell you, I know which one I choose. But I guess I want to ask you, which to you is the better, more life-giving, hope-filled choice? So I want to ask you, where are you with this God question? And where are you with Jesus? Do you want to draw closer to God? Do you want to experience healing, meaning, purpose, and love? I would just suggest you do this. Simply take a moment and say, Lord, I believe. I believe. Or if you're not sure and you're still thinking about it, maybe your prayer is this: Lord, I want to believe. I found myself in that place for a long time. I want to believe. Help me. Just open your heart and take that one step towards God. And here's what I've experienced: God will meet you there. And then I would encourage you, listen to the rest of this series, and I really hope it'll help. So does Jesus still matter? At Jesus' baptism, God broke the silence and spoke from the heavens and declared over Jesus, "This is my Son, the beloved." And it was a moment where God revealed God's presence. God revealed God's desire to be in relationship with us. And if God spoke then, maybe God is speaking to you right now, calling you to believe, calling you to trust, and to know you are not alone.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Mid-City Church Sermoncast. If you'd like to find a home sheet, a resource that accompanies the sermoncast that has more questions to explore, the scriptures we use today, and more information, you can visit our website, midcity.church/sermoncast. If you'd like to support Mid-City Church by giving, please text the word GIVE to 225-307-0662. Thank you for your generosity, and we look forward to seeing you next week.